This is a production of World Video Bible School. To God be the glory.
Welcome back to our continuing study in the book of Genesis. We'll be starting with chapter 8 in this particular session. It has been a good study so far, but as I told you from the beginning, this is not a verse-by-verse study. We go through and we try to pick out how to define certain terms for you, words and things like this, plus bring out major teachings. And this is what we are attempting to do in the class. All right, looking then in chapter 8, we're looking at the abatement of the flood, the waters going back down, and Noah getting then ready, of course, to come back out of the ark. There was one point I did want to mention as when we go into the flood itself. When God has him go into the ark in chapter 7, it says, "Then the Lord said to Noah, 'Come into the ark, you and your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation.'" But what is the first word that the Lord says to Noah? Does he say, "Go into the ark"? No. He says, "Come into the ark." What does that indicate? That indicates that God is inviting him to come into the ark with him. That God is going to be with him in the ark. That's important. That is a lot of confidence that he is giving to Noah. Yes, he and his family, they built this ark. But to actually make that final step and go in with all of this livestock, go in with all this feed, to everything that's in there, God says, "Come." Like as if we are going to make the trip. That had to be encouraging to that man and to his family for God to put it in those kinds of terms for him, knowing then that providence is going to be with him all the time. All right, so we have the flood going down in this area. Within verse 1, also here is something else. It says, "Then God did what? He remembered Noah." Here we go again. Did God forget him? No. He remembered him. Remember does not mean remembering something forgotten. God can't forget anything. Remember we talked about sins and God said, "I will remember them against you no more." It isn't that he's going to forget them. God doesn't forget anything. So what does remember mean here? It means remembering with kindness, granting requests, protecting and delivering. And I've given you several passages there that you can look up and see this actually in action, what it means for God to remember them. So God did not forget. God does not forget. Noah is not forgotten. He is remembered with kindness. Of course, providence. Obviously, providence is with him. Verses 2 through 5, we see the flood receding. Again, we see God's care, that he is definitely with Noah in a very special way. Of course, there are a lot of miracles involved with this total flood situation. But here are some things that I just would think of real quickly, like the flood is going down, right? Well, what would happen if this ark just accidentally got up on a steep slope, got hooked there, and the water settled? What would happen to that ark? It would tip, wouldn't it? What would happen to a lot of that livestock? It'd be crushed and killed. So, God sees to it that it comes down on more level ground. But it has to be really fairly level and fairly stable even then. God's providence has to be there. What with God opening that door and these animals all coming back out, you've got a terrible shift of load. And if it's in a precarious position, not having to be on a slope, but even in a rocky place where it could tip or move, you would still have lots of big problems. But God takes care of all of these things. God's care is there. The flood is going down. We saw that the flood is universal. After all, as we said before, why would an ark be needed at all if it were a local flood? The animals would have naturally migrated away from the flood area, had moved out as quickly as they could. Human beings could move out. He could have moved out himself, Noah could. No, this is a universal, a full flood over all of the world. 7 through 12, we see the testing then of the earth by birds. First of all, we have a raven. Now, a raven would just simply land anywhere. He would land just anywhere. Well, he doesn't land, so he comes back. 7 more days, he sends out a dove. Now, a dove will land, but he will land on a dry surface. And he comes back 7 more days. He sent out again, success. He brings back an olive leaf. And then he did not return the next time. Dry land is there. So we see the test. The test is made, and we now know that the waters are receding. First, in verse 13, it shows that the waters have gone down. This is the local outlook. And then it says the earth itself is dry. This means all over, not just in one small place. In 20 through 22, we see then the offering of thanks. This man is thankful. He has just literally seen the destruction of all mankind except those who that are living with him inside of this ark. He has seen the death of all air-breathing animals except those that are with him in the ark. And he has seen the providential care of God. He's safely delivered. He can come out of this ark. Oh my, just think about that. Worship. Giving glory and honor to God. That could be the only natural conclusion. And this is what that man does. He offers a thanksgiving. Well, as a result of all of this, then God is going to make a promise to Noah. What is this promise? First of all, he will not curse the ground again. Although, and the idea is for or because or on account of, the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. You notice God has recognized that we're going to continue to be this way. We're going to continue to be this way. But he's not going to curse the ground again. He will not destroy every living thing. He will not smite it again, as I have done, is what he says. And then he goes on and says, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, day and night, these shall not cease. In other words, life is really going to continue on. It's going to be quite a bit different world than before the flood, but that's all right. God is guaranteeing him that there is going to be a continuance. Now think about it. Really, in essence, as far as mankind is concerned, he almost stands in the place of Adam. For you see, everyone that is descended is going to be descended through him one way or another, because it's him and his family. Just as it was back here, Adam and his family. Everybody descended. All of those are destroyed except this man and his family, and then the descendancy comes from there. And so we have a man that loves God, loves him very much, very faithful to him, makes a sacrifice to him, and then God makes some promises to him in turn. Chapter 9, he tells them, just like back in the garden, be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply. This is saying to Noah, you're going to live a good time longer yet. And you're going to have children and more children, and we're going to multiply, and we're going to fill this earth again. And so these promises are made, these commands are given. And as I said, these are the same blessings. Be fruitful, multiply. In verse 2, we find that animals are going to fear men. Now, these are the beasts and birds. We're not talking about domesticated animals or the cattle and like this. We're talking about the wild beasts and birds. Verses 3 and 4. Verses 3 and 4. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all things, even as the green herbs. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is the blood. We have the admonition, the command not to eat blood. This is a universal command. It's not just for him at this time. We find that this is repeated in the law that is given to the Jews. We could go to the book of Acts and see that it's again repeated for Christians. We are not to eat blood. This is where the life is of an animal. We are not to eat blood. It is a universal prohibition, not just to any one age or to any one people. We also learn in these verses that vengeance belongs to the Lord. Now, how does he do this? How is vengeance his? Well, he can use vengeance by man. He can, as we know, he supports and requires capital punishment of governments. And so his vengeance can come that way. It can come by animals, by wild animals. Or it can come directly by God himself. But vengeance does belong to God. Not to you and me. Not to you and me at all. It is so easy sometimes to let those feelings just build up on you until you want to take matters into your own hands. I've been through it in my life. I don't deny it. I was wrong. But it's easy to get into that mood. It's easy to do. But vengeance is the Lord's. You have to work on your heart. You have to say, I will not take vengeance. I will treat so-and-so that has done wrong to me in a good way. Maybe we can change his heart. Maybe we can change the hearts. But vengeance, that's his. That's not my business. And quite frankly, I'm glad it is. You see, I might take too much vengeance, over-punish. I might not take enough. But you see, God's knowledge is perfect. It is absolutely true. The punishment that he metes out will be exactly right for the sins. That's right. The punishment will match the need that is there by the sins. If, as it says in the New Testament, you do lots of things wrong, you're going to be beaten with what? Many stripes. If you do fewer things wrong, you're going to be beaten with fewer stripes. The punishment will match. And he is the only one that can do that and do it accurately. We fall so short. We see it in school systems with their discipline. We see it in the courts and the discipline they put out. It is inconsistent. But God's is not. It will be exacted precisely unless you repent and turn to him and obey him. Faith and obedience. Faith and obedience. This is what will get us to heaven. All right, so vengeance is his. Now we're going to move into the covenant now of the rainbow. The covenant of the rainbow. Not to destroy every living creature by a flood again. You notice, by a flood again. This does not eliminate the fire and destruction as described by Peter in his second epistle in chapter 3. The rainbow is the sign. It is still with us. It is still right with us yet this day. Every time you look up and you see a rainbow, remember God's promise. He's not going to send a flood that's going to destroy the whole world again. It's going to come by fire next time, Peter says. But every time we look up, we can see the goodness, the providence, and the protection of God. We can see it clearly right there in the rainbow every time. And so what's he going to do? He's going to remember him, and he remembers us, all of mankind, truly, granting requests, answering prayers. Of who? Those that love him, those that are diligently seeking him. Those are the ones that really receive the best. In fact, where are all spiritual blessings today? In Christ Jesus. We know that. All right. Verses 18 through 29, the futures of the races of mankind are foretold. Noah, don't know why, but here is a good man, but what happens to him? He becomes drunk. He becomes drunk. And he was uncovered, or had uncovered himself in his tent. Ham comes along and he sees it. And the idea is that he saw his father's, and this is in the original, he saw his father's nakedness with delight. Now, humorous or what, I don't know quite how to describe that. But it was not repulsive to him. It was not something that he should not have seen, but it was funny, if you will. It was delightful to see this. And then what does he do? He tells it. And the idea is, again, with delight. Now, the brothers don't quite agree with this. They take a little different approach, do they not, when they cover him? But what does this show? This shows a very, very irreverent attitude on this man's part. And so then we have, cursed be who? Is it cursed to be on Ham? No. Cursed to be on Canaan. You see, the Canaanites are going to be so much like him in their attitude that God can even exchange the names. They're interchangeable here. So, cursed be his descendants. The fathers and the sons are going to be so very much alike. If you want to, check on the Hivites, for instance. We see that in Joshua 9, also Judges 1, 1 Kings 9, several places we can see this. Moving then into chapter 10 through 11, looking at the posterity of Noah and the early races in the Near East. In chapter 10, really there's not a whole lot to cover in this. There's a describing of who beget who and the descendancy of the family. But if you really just look at the last verse in chapter 10, and it's a summary. It's literally a summary of the whole chapter. These were the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations in their nations. And from these the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. This is essentially everything that he said in chapter 10. Begin then in chapter 11. Moving on quickly. We have the confusion of the tongues. We have the confusion of tongues at the Tower of Babel. This estimated time is about 100 years after the flood. About 100 years. If you figure out about 8 children per family, as we would see if we went back and looked through chapter 10. If we see about 8 children per family, this would be at about this time approximately 30,000 people. Yes, that's quite an expansion, isn't it? So there are about 30,000 people at this time. Now they had found a plain. Now this means a broad plain, a real wide place. Between mountains out there, yes, but a real broad and wide place. And they said, let us make bricks and burn them. This tells me something about these people. They've got something permanent in mind, not something temporary. For those bricks that are baked by the sun are not near as permanent as those that are baked in an oven. So these people have something very definitely in mind that is going to be permanent. That's going to be a strong structure. Permanence is definitely in their mind. And what is the reason in verse 4? Lest we be scattered. Now, wait a minute, aren't they supposed to go all over the earth? Aren't they supposed to reproduce, multiply, and fill the earth? Can you see they're going against God's will? Which brings up an idea in my mind, thinking about it. What happened in Matthew 28? Did the Lord not give the Great Commission and tell the first Christians to go into all the world? But where did they stay? Primarily they stayed right there in Jerusalem, didn't they? Well, if we read through the book of Acts, what happens when we get up into chapter 8? Persecution starts coming along, and then what? Then they go into all the world, teaching and preaching. What does that say for you and me in our local congregations? Are we evangelizing those around us? We should be. But should we be also sending people or helping people far off into all of the world? Yes. Our evangelism isn't just to be nearby. It isn't just to be far away. We're to take care of all of it. We're to take care of evangelizing here and there both. Now that goes for your congregation. I don't care in the world where you are. You have an obligation to seek and save those, the lost ones around you that you can, but also spread your influence as far and as wide as you can. Now, if you don't have the resources, through providence or whatever, you don't have them, God expects you to use every bit of your resources that you can to do what you can to evangelize. Always remember that. That is your responsibility. Regardless of the amount of exposure that you can have, you have that responsibility. In verse 5 now, it says, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built." Now, what does it mean the Lord came down? Did He actually come right down to this earth? No. That's called an anthropomorphism. Long word. What does it mean? Well, it's a picture, if you will. It's using a physical wording or a phrase as if somebody physically did something that pictures what they actually did. Now, so the Lord is going to come down. What's He going to do? He's going to have destruction of this. He's going to have the changing of the tongues. And so He's going to do something about it. So they use the idea of Him actually coming down. He doesn't leave where He is. Of course, He's omnipresent, but He doesn't leave heaven and come down to earth like some teach. No, that's not what this teaches. Verse 6, "And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them." In other words, there's one language. They can get together. They can talk. They can do anything they want. There it is. They're able to cooperate. They're able to understand each other. What they want to accomplish, they can do. Well, my friends, with one tongue, with one language, this is only the beginning of the evil these people could do. And yes, they're planning evil here. The solution? Give them different languages. Now, separation by languages results in separation into different lands. Babel, what does it mean? To confuse. That's the meaning of the word. Now you think about that. Of course, if you are not able to understand each other, how could you possibly even live next to each other? No matter how you tried, you can't understand what they're saying. God working? Yes. Miraculous? Yes. And so if we can't get along and if we can't understand each other, I'm going to get together with those few that I do understand and that we can talk together, and we're going to move off from this other group. How can we live together? And so we have the people separating. In verses 10 through 26, we have the history of Shem. As before, Moses takes those that are not going to be part of the mainstream narrative and removes them first. Then in 27 to 32, it moves down to Terah. Now, who is he? He's Abraham's father. So now we're narrowing it down. Who are we going to come to? We're going to come to Abram, or Abraham, are we not? And so God, through Moses, is narrowing the storyline, if you will, down exactly the way they always did in those books at that time. So Terah, he's going to leave Ur. He moves to Haran. But Abram will complete the move into Canaan. Abram will make that move. Terah is not going to do it. Now, a special note here, please. Abram, or Abraham, was in Mesopotamia when he received his call from God to go to Canaan. This was before he went to Haran. And you say, well, wait, I didn't see that in there. Let's go to the book of Acts, chapter 7. Acts chapter 7, the first 4 verses. I want to read it for you. Again, this is another time when we have to go to the entire context of the Bible to find out everything we can. Acts chapter 7, first 4 verses. Then the high priest said, "Are these things so?" And he said, "Men and brethren and fathers, listen. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran." and said to him, "Get out of your country and from your relatives, and come to a land that I will show you." Then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran. And from there, when his father was dead, he moved him to this land in which you now dwell. So you see, he's very clear. Where did he live? He was in Mesopotamia. You don't get that in reading the Genesis text. All right, moving on into our second major section in the outline now. We're going to get into the life of Abraham. It starts in chapter 12 and goes through chapter 25 and verse 18. We're going to go through now his call and his acceptance and the covenant that he receives by faith. Chapter 12, verses 1 through 9 are the call of Abraham and the exodus then from Haran. Abraham knew the direction they were going to go, and that's toward Canaan. But he did not know to which final place or which place he would finally be in. He knew the area, he knew the direction he was going, but he didn't know exactly where he was going to settle there. Verses 2 and 3, we find a sevenfold blessing that Abram receives for his obedience. You look down through, and first you find he's going to be made into a great nation. There is going to be a great nation that comes from him. He says to Abram, "I'm going to bless you." Oh, can you imagine what all goes with that word, bless? It's hard for us to even imagine all the things he's going to be doing for this man. He says, "I'm going to make your name great." In other words, not only is he going to be wealthy, not only is there great people going, but all around people will know him even at that time. And he says, and this is important, you will be a blessing. Wow. He will be a blessing. Are you a blessing? Am I a blessing? Think about that for a minute. God said this man was going to be a blessing. To whom? To those around him. Are you a blessing to people around you? Are people around you blessed just because they have met you, just because they're in your presence, just because they've been around you? Non-believers, are you a blessing to them? Members of the church, are you a blessing to them, helping them grow, giving them fellowship? Are you a blessing to everybody that you meet? Think about that. We should be. Just as God said Abraham is going to be a blessing to those around, we should be a blessing to everybody around us. That's a lot of responsibility, my friend. That's a lot of responsibility. And we see that coming to Abraham. Then he says, "I will bless those that bless you," and the second part of that curse, that promise is, "I will curse those that curse you." In other words, as you go through life, those that do well with you and bless you, I'm going to take care of also. But if they are your enemy, they're my enemy. Oh, can we apply that to the church as well? Absolutely. Absolutely we can apply that. If people oppose the church and try to do it harm and try to put it down, they are God's enemies. Even if they do evil things to us, even if they would so much as kill us, if they would persecute us, we may be hurt physically, not eternally, but physically on this earth. God says, those people are my enemies. They're my enemies. Now, let's get people on the right side of God. Let's help them be our friends. Let's be a blessing to them. And then the last promise, he says, "In you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Oh my. All of the families of the earth. Not just his descendants, not just those around him now, but eventually all of the families of earth. Well, does that mean at that time, in the future, or in the past? My answer is yes. All families, on all sides of time, are going to be blessed through his seed, which is Christ, The book of Galatians identifies him directly as being the seed that is a blessing to the entire world, to all families on the earth. And that comes true. These promises are made and they are kept. All right, now, let's look at these promises in a little different way. God's promise to Abraham. I want to ask this question: is premillennialism true? Is it true? Well, these promises really had three major parts when we get involved with them. First, he says a great nation would arise from his descendants. Secondly, the land of Canaan would be possessed by his descendants. And thirdly, all nations would be blessed through his seeds. Now then, what is premillennialism? I have to cover that first. Well, this is really hard to define because the people that believe in it have a hard time defining it. It seems like every person that believes it, or every congregation that believes it in just a little different way than everybody else. There is no standard pattern to what they believe in premillennialism. But the basic idea is this in all of them, is that God sent his Son down to this earth to bring salvation for all, and to have, as it were, really a physical kingdom on this earth. And so God sent his Son. He comes to this earth, but you know, those terrible Jews, they defeated God, is what it boils down to. They threw a monkey wrench into God's words, to use a phrase that we use today. In other words, they were able to defeat God in his plan to establish this earthly paradise. Therefore, the church had to come into existence as a hurry-up, stopgap measure until Christ can come back again and then set up his kingdom on this earth, this glorious kingdom. And so, in essence, the Jews defeated God in the first century. The church is an afterthought. Wrong. Wrong. I can prove through the Scriptures, and I'll give you these 4 points. I'll let you try to look them up. I can prove that the church was in the mind of God at the birth of Paul, at the time of Moses, at the time of Abraham, and before the foundations of the world. I can prove the church was in God's mind at all of those times. But now, here in this, we're going to look at this and see if all of these promises were kept. For if they were kept, then premillennialism is false. There is no other coming kingdom. There is no other time on earth that God's going to have to come back and do the finalizing of all of these promises that were made to Abraham. You see, they have to make it physical instead of spiritual. And they base it upon these specific verses. All right. I'm going to tell you quickly that all phases of this promise have been fulfilled. Now, first of all, let's look at the great nation promise. Was it fulfilled? Yes, it was fulfilled in Israel. Israel becomes a nation. This is declared in Deuteronomy 26. Also, you can check in Exodus chapters 19 and 20. What happened in those chapters? That's when the law of Moses was given. You see, a nation, a kingdom, has to have a ruler, it has to have people, it has to have territory, and it has to have law. Well, you've got a ruler, you've got God, you've got people, the Israelites, you've got to have a law, they get that in Exodus 20, and they've got to have a land, they go in and possess it. Now, does God fulfill this land promise? Yes. Does he give them then the nation promise? Yes, and that's what we're looking right now. The nation promise. Do they become a nation? Yes. Jeremiah 31, for instance, through 34, that is Jeremiah 31 through 34, says that this nation is going to be a spiritual nation also. That's today. What happened back then? It was a physical nation, but now it is a spiritual nation. Is that kingdom in existence? Yes, this new kingdom is in existence. We see this in Isaiah 2, Daniel 2, Joel 2, all being completed in Acts 2. But I'm going to add a couple more of those to you. Now think about what I'm saying. Isaiah 2, Daniel 2, Joel 2, Hosea 2, Zechariah 2. All of those books in chapter 2 have prophecies of the spiritual kingdom. Where is it completed? Acts. What chapter? 2. So when you talk to people about the kingdom being established and that it is this kingdom, remember Isaiah, Joel, Daniel, Hosea, Zechariah, chapter 2. Go to any one of those, go to the second chapter, you'll see the prediction of the church that it's going to be spiritual, and you'll see the completion in Acts chapter 2. Very easy to keep track of. Again now, is the kingdom now in existence? Yes. Colossians 1:13 tells us. The church is that kingdom now. Yes. Now, my friends, this is a very important point. There is no prophecy of a Jewish kingdom in the New Testament. Now, did you get that clear? There is no prophecy of a Jewish kingdom in the New Testament. None whatsoever. None at all. And so we see that God did make them a physical nation, but that He also foretold that nation that it was going to be changed into a spiritual nation. Have those two come into existence? Did that physical nation come in? Yes. We see that when they went into the land and they had a law. How about the spiritual nation? Did it come in? Yes. It was foretold in those 5 books, chapter 2, completed in Acts chapter 2. We see that all there, completed and fulfilled. Now, when we come back into the next section, we're going to see if the land promise that was given to Abraham is fulfilled. That's very important to see that it is fulfilled. See you next session.